parts of the story. A lot of you probably don't know much of the story, and I'm going to try and make it really succinct.
You're fine.
Okay.
They'll like listening to you way more than they like listening to me.
This is like a 20-year long.
Way to go back to Wisconsin.
God always has a redemptive plan.
Yes, he does.
And sometimes we think that redemption is going to be a lot faster than it is. And so in this story, I'm going to tell you about two different prophetic words that are all wrapped together. So you need to know some backstory for these to even really make sense and for you to understand why these are so powerful in our lives. So we have been a couple that has always been able to get pregnant really easily but not stay pregnant. And so we've had multiple losses, and that's always been hard. And if you've struggled with miscarriage or infertility, you know how devastating that is. And so when we very first got married, like, surprise, 6 weeks after we got married, not good timing at all, found ourselves pregnant. And Chris was not excited. I was very shortly very excited, and we lost that baby pretty early on, about 9 weeks. Devastated me. And we didn't even try to get pregnant again until we had Natalie, which was 6 years later. And she was a miracle in and of herself. There were things that we didn't know were going on, and God intervened and brought her early. She was preemie, so that she wouldn't die, basically. And it's another story for another time. But she was a miracle. And then shortly thereafter, when she was about 6 months old, we were surprised, pregnant again. Told you, it happened really easily. And I lost that baby again. And one day I was here at the church, and I was feeding her back in what was my mom's office at the time. And Manuela, who is not here,
she got called out twice now.
She came by and she said, so I had a dream. And in this dream, there was a little girl. And she said, would you please tell my mom not to cry? I'm coming. And Manuela said, and then she told me her name, but I'm not going to tell you. Which was so good that she didn't tell me, because about 6 months later, I'm pregnant again. And I am sure it is this little girl. Because I'm like, man, God's going to redeem. God's going to it wasn't a girl. It was Ethan.
Very different.
Very different. Precious, precious gift in his own right. But we were over at my mom's house, swimming, and I'm talking to Manuela, and I wasn't far enough along to know that it wasn't a boy. So passed my first trimester, but didn't know. I was sure we're having a girl.
And I guessed all
He knew.
of all my kids.
But he knew. He just always likes to tell that part
because he was right.
He was right.
It's the one time. It's marked on the calendar. It's the one time.
There were 3 times he was right.
Okay.
So I'm talking to her, and I'm like, so yeah, I picked out the baby's name. And she said, well, what was it? And I said, well, I want to name her Susanna. And she said, Susanna what? And I said, well, I think I'm going to name her Susanna Caroline, because, we've got Susan and Carol are the grandmas. That would be really cool if she had both grandmas' names. She's like, oh, okay. And I was like, but there's this other name that just kind of keeps coming to me. And she's like, well, what is that? And I said, it's Joy. And she said, that's her name. Susanna Joy is her name. The girl in the dream. That was her name. And the Lord had given us her name. So immediately it was tested, right? And so now I had held on to it, but now I really, really held on to it, right? It had gone from that's a really cool dream to this is God's promise for me. This baby's coming. We had Ethan. He was really hard. God bless him. He's the most amazing kid, but he was hard. He was sick. He was allergic. He was really hard. And so it was a few years before we decided, okay, we think we're ready. We needed to kind of get through the early season with him, and that's not a knock on him. It just was what it was. And so we said, okay, we're ready, and we got pregnant and made it past the first trimester. Woohoo, this one's good. It's going to be our girl that we've been promised. And then when I was almost 20 weeks, we found out that baby had died. And a first trimester miscarriage is devastating. A second trimester miscarriage is heartbreaking. And we held that baby and we named that baby. His name is Evan. This is why I brought the Kleenex. Because even though that's a long time ago, but he's still with us, as all of the babies are, but I don't know. When you look at him and hold him, it's just a little different maybe. So anyway, okay. And at every single point, what is the enemy trying to do? He's trying to steal our joy. He's trying to steal our hope. He's trying to steal our faith. But God has a redemptive plan. And we knew we had been promised this baby. And so, next time we got pregnant, it was a girl. And she actually made it. And there were some things during her pregnancy that happened that I won't go into that were also just a lot of the Lord working in me, fear and faith, and another story for another time. But towards the end of my pregnancy with her, I found out that I was positive for Group B strep, which is not unusual. They usually have a plan for giving the mother antibiotics when she goes into labor. And the problem is that somehow, we don't know how, the doctors don't really know how, but she didn't get Group B strep in the normal way, which is when the baby's born. That's when they contract it. She contracted Group B strep in the womb. And so as soon as she was born, she was having difficulty breathing. And they whisked her away to the neonatal ICU, and she spent 10 days on IV antibiotics. And that was hard. But she was our promised baby, and I really believed that God was going to redeem everything. So we brought her home, and everything seemed pretty good for 4 or 5 months. And then she started having a little bit of eczema when she started eating food. And then at 7 months, she had her first really severe allergic reaction. And then it just got worse. And it got worse. And then she'd have another severe allergic reaction. And every time that would happen, things would get worse, and her skin would get more and more severe and sensitive. And she'd become more and more sensitive to foods. And, you know, it just kept escalating and escalating and escalating. And I'm like, God, what? This was our redemption. What is happening? What is happening here? And deep in my heart, I always believed that it went back to her contracting that infection and having to be on antibiotics, and that her immune system was damaged just from the very first minute. You know, she didn't have a chance to be with me 5 minutes before we just whammoed her. You know, and we were saving her life. Group B can be a fatal infection if it's not treated. And we were saving her life. Satan was trying to steal her life, but we were doing what we had to do, and I still believe we did what we had to do. But there was a price at that. And so, long story short, things with Sue are not good most of the time. She suffers a lot. But if you've seen her, you know that she's very aptly named. She is one of the most joyful kids that is around. We call her our hippie fairy child. But we battle every day, and we don't have answers, and our doctors don't have answers, and they're kind of like, well, this is the best we can do. And it really limits her life a lot, and ours. So a few weeks ago, when Tim and Isabel were speaking about healing. I mean, I'm just sitting back there like absolutely bawling. Pam's passing me notes, and the people around me who know what the battle is that we've been in for all of these years know how encouraging that is and how challenging it is to hear when you see other people experiencing healing and you haven't, and you've asked and you've prayed and you fasted and anointed and people have prayed and lots. This kid's covered in prayer, and it's been a tool of the enemy, obviously, all of these years to tell us lies. God really is a respecter of persons, and you're not doing enough. If you just were a little more spiritual, maybe so, or if you had done this treatment instead of that treatment, you might have had that breakthrough, but you chose the wrong thing. Lots and lots and lots of things that the enemy throws at us all the time. And lots of opportunities to be disappointed in the Lord, to be angry at the Lord. And like Isabel said, you just lose your ability to have faith for that anymore. And you really need the people around you to say, oh, I have faith for that. Even if you don't, I do. And so when they were sharing, I was just like, they were essentially telling the exact same story that we've had. And so we prayed, and we prayed for a long time, and they were crying, we were crying, and all the people who came up to pray with us were crying, and it was an extremely emotional event, right? So after that, I'm sitting over here just kind of like decompressing from the really intense moment that was. And Phoebe Williams comes over to me, and she said, Miss Erica, when we were praying for Susanna, I had a picture. I said, oh, really? What was it? And she said, well, there was this room, and it was full of pottery. And all the pottery pieces were people. And I was like, okay. And she said, and Satan came in, and he was robbing the pottery. Sorry. And while he was doing that, Susanna got knocked off and broken. But then God came in and he picked up all the pieces and he's putting them back together. And so what I wanted to say about that is that in both of those instances, the Lord used somebody to prophetically come in and speak to the deep pain and to encourage and say that he sees us and he sees what's happened and he has a plan, and it might not be happening as quickly as we want it to, but he has a redemptive plan.